In this video, I'll be discussing some of the behavioral characteristics of autism spectrum disorder. Excuse me, I'm sick again. It's been a rough start to the school year with my students getting sick, and my immune system is down, and I keep picking up their stuff. So, anyways, we'll be talking about the behavioral characteristics along with some interventions that I observed and that I use, as well as the effectiveness of those. So some of the characteristics that I see are perseverating. So a student may perseverate on a topic. I have a student who has been obsessed with the heart for a couple weeks, and so everything that we do, he always brings it back to the human heart, always brings it back to the human heart no matter what. That's perseverating on a topic. It can be perseverating on something that's happened. So I think I've discussed in some of my previous videos that my students are in a therapeutic behavior intervention class. So the majority of them are labeled with emotional disturbances and oppositional defiant disorder, as well as autism. But autism is not their primary EMIS label. It's either their secondary it is their secondary EMIS label. So I do see those characteristics of autism, but sometimes they are perseverating on something that's happened. So two students have gotten in an argument due to that ED aspect. Something has happened, and they're perseverating and can't let it go. We see that a lot. I see impaired social skills. So this can be a lack of interest in others, or not initiating those social interactions. It's very hard for them. My students, because they are together for so many years, in our class, it's a self-contained class of 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. This year we also have a 3rd grader there as well. But since they're together for so many years in a row, they have learned to interact with each other. But when they go out and are included in the general education population, so for things like PE, lunch, recess, times like that, they do not initiate social interactions with others outside of their peer group that they know from our class. And when someone new comes in, we just had a new student join us. You see that same thing where the new student doesn't really interact with others, and same the opposite way. The kids who've been there for a while, that struggles until we kind of build up those relationships and those interactions. Something else I see is struggling with expressive and receptive language, which I know is more of a communication characteristic, but it also affects their behaviors, because if they cannot effectively express their needs and their wants, their desires, especially in our class, not being able to express that they need a break when they're upset from that ED component, or not being able to express what might help them, students get very frustrated, and that can cause behaviors. You see a lack of eye contact, those pragmatic speech skills and figurative speech skills, which again look like they could fall under that communication piece or that social piece, but it also falls under that behaviors. Those are behaviors. You and I know that when we're talking to somebody, we look them in the eyes and are able to communicate with them our wants, our needs, use that pragmatic language that makes practical language to use in a conversation. We're able to do that, whereas a lot of my students are not. And like I said, that can cause a lot of behaviors. As far as the more stereotypical behaviors, excuse me, we see a lot of repetitive behaviors. So some of that could be, I have a student who has to turn the lights on and off. I have another one who has to line up. We have daily trace time that the students earn points throughout the day, and depending upon what level they're on, they're able to receive a reinforcer. Certain things that they can earn during our 2 daily trace times. And I have one student who absolutely loves these little plastic dinosaurs, and every time he takes them out, he lines them up in a perfect row across our classroom. So you see some of those repetitive and restrictive behaviors. I have not observed in my classroom scripting, but we have an autism behavior intervention class that is right next door to mine, and we provide resources to each other and assistance as needed, and support. So I have been over there and watch students that are scripting, and just like he's seen a video or a movie and is just repeating it. Whatever he's seen, watched, heard, is just completely in that movie and scripting what's going on, or in that clip or that book. I've also seen some intense sensory input needs. So things like your body needs. So maybe your body needs some deep pressure. Maybe you need to go do a few laps, or something like food. So like texture, clothing. Those can be different sensory needs, something being too loud, anything like that. We see that. I have a student who needs to be prepped and wear headphones before the fire alarm goes off for a fire drill. We have students who can only wear certain types of clothing because the texture is irritating to them, or only eat certain foods because the taste and texture bothers them. I have some students who use weighted vests or weighted blankets throughout the day. I have others who need a little more exercise, so they go and bounce a ball, where that force of throwing the ball and it coming back and catching them, just that jolt, that deep pressure in their body. I have others who need deep pressure, will push against a concrete wall just to give their body that pressure. So some other things we see are biting and chewing, rocking back and forth, some hand flapping, tics, so like vocal sounds, a lot of blinking. I see physical and verbal aggression a lot in my class, which again, some of that can be attributed to the ED and ODD. Some of that also can be attributed to ASD. So just depends. We also can see a lot of avoidance and withdrawal. Refusal, again, that can be some of that ED and OD, and can also be some of that ASD. Some of the interventions that we use, we do a lot of prompting and modeling in my classroom. We use some antecedent-based interventions. We practice extinction, which is sometimes not so fun, especially because we do have that ED and ODD side. Not just the autism piece in our class. So a lot of times that extinction process can be very physical, a student becoming very physical towards other students or towards the staff. So that's normally not a fun process to go through, but we do use that. We use a lot of reinforcements, as well as positive behavior intervention supports. We use a lot of response interruption and redirection, a lot of social stories and visuals. We use verbal cues as well as visual cues. And for some of the more significant behaviors, when it has not been a something that only involves the student but may involve a staff member or may involve other students, we use restorative practices as well. Which kind of just walks through each person, what they were thinking, what there was going on, how they felt, and how it affected the other person. So kind of to make sure to restore those relationships. I think the most important thing is that the interventions that we're using are evidence-based practices. So we know that they are researched, scientifically researched, and there is evidence that they work. And we try to use only evidence-based practices to make sure that we are helping our students succeed the best we can. I feel like for the most part, our interventions are pretty effective. We are helping to reshape a lot of the behaviors that we see in our class. Again, some of that is that ED and ODD piece, and some of that is the autism piece. They kind of overlap. It's hard to say which is exactly which, but because of that, we really work on reshaping those behaviors. Our class is the most restrictive environment for a student before they move into a non-public school in California. And so we really try to make sure that our students are progressing. And if they're not, try to find another intervention or another way to address their needs so that they can progress and not have to end up in a non-public school. So like I said, I feel like for the most part, ours are effective. I think it's important to look at big picture and over a span of time, not just one day, because as we know, kids, adults, anybody can have good days and bad days. So looking at that overall percentage, how long that intervention has been in place, and looking at the data that way instead of just one day at a time. So looking at all the factors. But for the most part, our interventions have been pretty effective. Thank you.